King vs Marco was a video I've been meaning to make since summer, but till this day I've had mixed thoughts on who would actually win. But in today's video, let's see who would actually come out on top. What's up guys, Wes Gambly here, and in today's video we've got an interesting topic to go over. I haven't done a 1v1 on One Piece in a long time, and so do make sure to enjoy this one. But the question at hand is, what would happen if the first division commander of the Whitebeard Pirates came to blows with the second strongest on the Beast Pirates? If you enjoy One Piece versus battles like these, go ahead and subscribe. You'll get more videos and we'll both be happy. Starting off with the best looking devil fruit in all of One Piece, we've got Marco. This guy is either insanely overrated or insanely underrated. From my perspective at least, I've never seen something in between for him. But regardless, I'll try my best to convey how strong I think he is and fairly put him against the likes of King. Now, something I want to make clear before scaling Marco is that Marineford scaling is ridiculous. I mainly bring this up because of the statements people like to use from this arc, like this one. This statement pisses me off, and the fact that people even take it seriously baffles me. In no instance during Marineford was Marco fighting on par with any admiral that was genuinely in a confrontation with him. Kizaru and Marco had a short scuffle, with Kizaru exiting the fight unscathed by Marco. Aokiji got kicked off guard by Marco and came back unscathed. And don't even get me started on Akainu. Akainu literally fought him and 15 other commanders at the same time. I perceive this statement as a hype statement for the story because everything we see in the story contradicts it. But with that being said, let's enter Marco's strength. This stat for Marco is kind of weird. Like I said a little earlier, Marco doesn't have scaling to the admirals because he's not actually able to damage them in any way. But in the Onigashima War is when we actually get to see his strength and AP in action. In chapter 1006 of the manga, Marco starts a battle with both King and Queen. He first shoots a Phoenix brand that deals damage to Queen. Queen by this point can tank attacks from a nerfed Big Mom, walk off unscathed, and continue fighting the Yonko. After Marco hits Queen with this attack that seems to be some kind of shockwave, he goes to King himself and overpowers him, flying him into a building. As King recovers from the attack, Marco comes in and hits him with another one. The feat in particular we have to focus on is in this panel right here that people like to use to upscale Marco's AP. Most people think this is King bleeding from Marco's attacks, and the reason that's so significant is because King has his flames on, but this just isn't usable. This isn't blood, it's rubble, and it's consistent that King's durability is almost impenetrable, but we'll get into that later. Overall, however, Marco's AP is strong enough to deal with the likes of a suppressed King and Queen, allowing him to casually 1v2 them. A less contentious and more impressive stat for Marco is his speed. Now, this is where we can kind of use his Marineford feats. In chapter 554, after Marco stops Kizaru's light beams, he starts flying towards him. After traveling the distance, he's able to hit Kizaru. Of course, Kizaru reacts and blocks accordingly, but depending on your interpretation of the feat, the fact that Kizaru didn't outright dodge the attack can upscale Marco to having relative speed to him on occasion. But more on Marco's speed, during his scuffle with King and Queen, he's able to blitz both of them multiple times. Marco at this moment had been fighting the entire war and used his powers to save the samurai. We don't know for sure how much that takes a toll on Marco, but what we do know is that during their fight, he was fatigued. We see him huffing and puffing, and then after almost 20 chapters, we see Marco on the floor at his limit. For durability and endurance, this is where Marco kind of lacks. Of course, I personally think all humans have relative durability. I think people mix up endurance with durability. What durability is the ability to withstand attacks, or in other words, what attacks can you take that will do 0 damage to you? On the other hand, what endurance is the ability to suffer patiently, or in other words, what level of attacks actually damage you but you're able to continue fighting through. For example, Zoro's durability along with every other human is that of a human. Odin literally died to a random gunshot and Zoro got pierced by nails. But Zoro's endurance is crazy. He took immense damage from Kaido and Big Mom Sakai attack, but he was able to endure the damage he took and let out Ashura. So taking this all the way back to Marco, he has human durability. He literally got stabbed by a bunch of fodder. What matters is the fact that Marco can heal his wounds, and that's why he can walk around with such terrible durability. This also makes his endurance insanely hard to gauge, because how can we know what he can take before he completely dies? He literally revived himself against Kizaru. What this leads to is Marco's hacks. Marco has the undisputable best looking devil fruit in One Piece, but design aside, the things that come with it are clutch. He can regenerate with it and heal other people. He can also fly with it and use attacks like Phoenix Brand that creates a shockwave doing internal damage to people. But there is an ability that Marco possesses that is so insanely underrated but also so important for the matchup at hand. Marco possesses the ability to negate or absorb flames. In chapter 995 of the manga, Marco clashes with Big Mom's heavenly fire coming from Prometheus. And in the next panel, Prometheus says himself that he's losing to Marco's flames. In the anime, it's expanded even more for us. When Marco clashes with Prometheus, Prometheus does the same face in the manga, but then Marco completely negates him, and Prometheus is reduced to a small flame. Marco doesn't explain what he did, but it's clear that he absorbed Prometheus to a certain extent. More evidence of this is during chapter 1043 when Kaido uses a blast breath on Nami and Marco comes in to save her. He uses his named attack Undying Thistle to negate and absorb every flame that comes from Kaido's attack. Funnily enough, Marco literally used this attack on King himself when he tried to punch Zoro with flames. This, like I said, is immensely important for this matchup, so keep that in mind for the simulation. Marco also has armament haki and observation haki in his kit. But with that being said, we've skilled Marco and gone over all of his abilities. And now, let's go over King's. When it comes to King's scaling, it's important to keep in mind that everything he's done before chapter 1027 of the manga isn't that much of significance. The reason why is something I'll go over right now as we discuss King's strength. Now, before 1027, we saw King use a grand total of like one named attack, and that was Imperial Flame. But regardless of that, him in his zone form attacked Sanji so hard he thought he was going to die from it. That aside, however, 1027 is when we see King actually start to open his kit and use what he has to his advantage. The first thing we see is King using his wings in his hybrid form to throw blades at Zoro. We see that the weight of the blades were so potent they sent Zoro flying after stacking them up. A couple chapters later, King starts toying with Zoro. He uses Imperial Udon, to which it damages Zoro, but Zoro is able to narrowly dodge it. The problem with this attack is the obvious build-up time. If King uses it the first time and catches you off guard, the second time it would be expected because he has to pull his face back. Regardless, it's still definitely potent. But all of that aside, let's talk about King's most lethal attacks, his Imperial Flame series. These fire dragons are said to be like magma. Whether it is or isn't magma really comes down to interpretation, but I feel like it refers to the temperature of the flames rather than it being actual magma. Now, these flames are meant to be incredibly potent, but we didn't actually get to see it used against anyone other than some random fodder. So aside from that, I want to mention an underrated feat. This random ass explosion King let off during their initial fight. Now, the conditions for this attack was completely unknown, but it was insane in terms of lethality. Zoro himself claimed that if he hadn't used armament haki, he would have died to the explosion. This is very telling of two things. It's AP, but at the same time, it's speed. Zoro, who didn't anticipate the explosion, was able to react and activate armament haki to counteract the damage. And he took the impact of the explosion unscathed, literally letting off a named attack right after. But regardless, it had one-shot potential and definitely is something that people should look out for when they're in the fight with the Lunarian. For speed, this and durability is King's most complex stat. The reason for this is the way his body works. To go over it quickly, King usually has flames on his back. When they're on, he has near impenetrable durability. But when they're off, his defense is lower, but in return he receives an amp in speed. With his flames on, he's able to clash and press Zoro. With his flames off, well, it's a different story. I used to be under the impression that Flames Off King was a real ass speedster, but since researching more on King, I've come to the conclusion that this just isn't the case. People tried to compare King to Sanji, but it just got super funny when I found this particular scene. In chapter 1027, Zoro and a Flames Off King entered the exact same forward hallway as the one Sanji and Queen were in. While Sanji can look at Queen and disappear before his eyes in a forward hallway, so he's not just going on top of him or to the right or the left, King does no such thing, and Zoro's even able to react and clash with him before getting overpowered. King can only, in quotations, disappear when he's outside and flying around Zoro's perception. So I am now under the belief that Flames Off King really isn't that much faster than when he has his flames on. Zoro can react and at the very least block, let alone clash with the attacks he throws. However, King with his flames off is still a fast guy, as he's able to one-up the speed that was pressing Zoro. For durability and endurance, this is a way better side for King. Flames on, he's damn near invincible. There was a debate on whether or not advanced Conqueror's Haki can damage Flames on because of the trash talk Zoro was letting out, and honestly, I wouldn't be mad if that were the case. That doesn't matter to this matchup, however, because Marco has nothing to damage Flames on King with. But when King turns off his flames is when we see a King who can take damage. I don't care what anyone says, losing to 3 advanced Conqueror's Haki attacks from someone who scarred Kaido in a weaker form is better than losing in 17 attacks from a guy who couldn't do any damage to Kaido in a stronger form. But anyways, King's durability and endurance with Flames on is top within the verse in my opinion, with Flames off being obviously weaker but nothing to sneeze at. And finally, King's hacks. We know he has armament haki and observation haki as well as fire conjuring, and he has flight with or without his zone devil fruit. With all of that being said, we've scaled both of these winged fighters, so now it's time to discuss exactly what would happen if these two were to throw hands, and who exactly would come out on top. For this battle, it'll take place at the Grand Canyon. There's no specific reason why, I just happen to think about it. Same rules as always, whoever dies or gets knocked out first loses. So let's go and simulate the fight. Play the Budokai music. So the fight would start and both combatants would be in the sky off rip. King would be shooting the beams he was shooting at Zoro with, and they likely wouldn't even hit Marco, but even if they did, he would automatically recover as we seen in the scuffle with Kizaru. Marco would then try to kick a Flames on King in the stomach after blitzing him, but he would just get pushed back and take no damage. King, realizing laser beams isn't going to kill Marco, tries to use Imperial Udon, to which Marco easily dodges. But after he dodges, he takes the opportunity to use Phoenix Brand on King. Reminder that whenever King uses Imperial Udon, his flames turn off, and so the shockwave from Marco's attack would most likely damage a Flames Off King. Queen earlier during the arc got hit by Phoenix Brand and was bleeding out buckets, emphasizing that it hurt so much because it's internal damage, it's a shockwave. And with this, I see no reason why this same attack shouldn't do anything to Flames Off King, because again, is Duraneg, an attack that targets the insides. However, regardless of his shockwave doing anything to King, King turns his flames on again and starts using his fire dragons. But he's surprised to see that Marco, whether it be with Undying Thistle or his regular clashes, was able to negate his flames from the dragons. So what we're seeing is a character who hard counters everything King throws at him and regenerates from his less potent attacks, but on the other hand we have a character who's taking damage from Marco with his flames off, but the AP of the shockwaves aren't so potent that we can say that it could take down King. Even though we literally saw Marco consistently blitz a flames on King, blitzing a guy you can't damage isn't going to help in the long run. So what I think this battle comes down to is a battle of attrition. Luckily, we've seen a limit from one of these characters and an implied limit to another character. Marco was down for a little bit after clashing with a Yonko, healing the alliance with his Devil Fruit, and 1v2ing King and Queen. But in chapter 1035 of the manga, King tells Zoro that he doesn't want to drag out the fight. I don't know exactly why he would say he doesn't want to drag out the fight when Zoro literally told him if the fight drags on, he'll die. With the breath ball on the screen, I think this could be a sign of incompetent stamina, and so if Marco and King were to continue their fight just countering each other, I think Marco's winning the battle of attrition. And so with all of that said, I'm giving the win to Marco. If you disagree, you can go ahead. But regardless, the better wing flame came down to the Phoenix of Wiper's legacy.